Good morning, home video enthusiasts. Your mission, should you decide to accept it, is to obtain proof of the theatrical audio mix and research the home video history of the first Mission Impossible film with some discussion of the sequels in the franchise. I don't have to stress the importance of this matter to you. Because of its urgency, I've already sent a team selected from your usual group. Ethan Hunt.
Can we get a cappuccino machine in here? Because I don't know what you call this junk.
Ethan Hunt.
Help me help you. Get a cappuccino machine in here.
Ethan Hunt.
Coffee is all about the perfect balance of freshly prepared grounds to hot, fresh, boiling water.
Ethan Hunt.
I can't work without my coffee.
Ethan Hunt.
I want the cappuccino machine!
Ethan Hunt.
This guy is gonna get us the cappuccino machine.
Ethan Hunt.
You know what, Kittredge? Your coffee sucks.
And Ethan Hunt.
I feel the need for a cappuccino machine.
As always, should you or any member of your videophile force be caught or killed, the Secretary will disavow all knowledge of your actions, just like they're disavowed in every Mission Impossible film. This high-8 tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds. Good luck.
Hello and welcome back to this damn fully idealistic crusade. This video is a brief home video history and overview of the first Mission Impossible film from 1996, and also discussing the whole sort of video history of the series, because as you go through the individual releases, they were mostly tied around to releases of the various sequels, and you can see the sort of evolution of not just the first film, but then the second, the third, the fourth, fifth, and all the way up to the current UHD releases. And they also follow the sort of trends that Paramount was doing with their video releases at the time, starting back during the 90s video era and primarily focusing on Laserdisc and VHS. And if you look at Paramount's whole history of video releases and the way they treat their catalog, they do their big features of the time, their big hits of the time, and then all their other catalog titles for those specific eras are done in the same way. So in terms of their Laserdisc and VHS releases, the big films of that time were done a certain way, and then all the catalog titles followed suit. Then moving into DVD, their first discs were always bare bones, and then all the catalog titles followed that pattern. They were usually following Laserdisc masters as well. And then we jump into later on the 2000s when they started doing more special editions and remasters and things and early HD scans, and they did reissues and special editions of films that followed suit for their whole catalog. And then we jumped into the early days of Blu-ray and HDDVD, and then the Paramount catalog kind of shut off for a while until, the past 5 to 10 years when they picked up with Blu-ray and then got into UHD. So there was a significant portion of time where a lot of Paramount titles, the Mission Impossible films especially, the first 3 were stuck in really old crummy transfers with not good audio, and they had a lot of problems that because they were tied to Paramount, they just were stuck that way. So to start with what most of us had growing up, we have the original US NTSC VHS release with the original poster key art. It has a nice gloss finish on the sleeve. This is still a nice looking VHS cover. Of course, we have the spine with the logo. Turn it the other way, of course. And then we have the rear with the same key artwork that was used on all the initial video releases. This, of course, as is indicated on the packaging, like the vast majority of VHS tapes, has been modified to fit your screen because this is a pan and scan transfer. But do keep in mind, this is a pan and scan transfer of a Brian De Palma film that is beautifully photographed in scope with a lot of his trademark split diopter shots. And so growing up watching this in pan and scan, it was very perplexing frequently, and this is definitely a film that will make you never want to see a pan and scanning job ever again, and will hammer home how terrible of a practice that was. But it definitely gives you a nostalgia trip to go all the way back and look at the original pan and scan VHS copies of Mission Impossible. We do have a nice custom label, as Paramount would always do for their big films, and then the custom spine label looks really nice with the MI logo on it. So this is just something I've held on to because I have great nostalgic memories of rewatching this film ad nauseum growing up, because outside of the Brosnan Bond films, this was the only other serious spy film that was a major newer film at that time that I could latch onto and watch a lot. So this is obviously the film I still have the most nostalgia and most interest in. It is my favorite and the one I've seen the most times. But definitely you don't want to watch it in pan and scan. But if you had the setup back in the day and you definitely had the money to invest in Laserdisc and you were a home theater dedicated fan, even back then in 1996, 1997, you went for the Laserdisc release, which not only had Dolby AC3 5.1 discrete surround sound, but had a widescreen transfer in addition to lovely packaging and a nice gatefold. This is the same master as what was prepared for the pan and scan. So if you did compare the two, you'd be able to realize that the source master was the same print element and the same technically THX stamped that we approve of this transfer. It was the same base master before the terrible pan and scanning was applied to it. And of course, the VHS is in 220i versus the Laserdisc roughly 420i, and also having it and Letterboxed actually maintaining the scope aspect ratio. However, what sets it apart even more and what makes this the most important release I'm going to go over for a lot of different reasons is actually dealing with the sound. Now, the picture quality for the Laserdisc release is still solid. It's still a really essential, very common disc to pick up. This is one of the first discs I would tell anybody to pick up if they get into Laserdisc collecting, because it's very common, it's well made, has nice art, and it's very cheap. But particularly the audio is what interests me most, and why I keep returning to this disc every time I rewatch the film. I'm always going to rewatch this, because this is the only release that actually contains the full theatrical sound mix of the film. And what I mean by that is, like a number of, it seems to be specifically Dolby Digital films at this time, and this was when Dolby was competing with DTS and SDDS, and they were trying to win out in the digital sound wars in terms of film formats and in theaters that had finally jumped into digital sound in the 5.1 era in the early to mid-90s. They all did different things to try to compete and seem to be better than the other system, essentially, their competition. A lot of prints eventually started carrying multiple different soundtrack types. So you'd see a print that had DTS timecode and Dolby Digital, which of course was then just referred to as SR-D or Surround Digital or AC3 eventually. But there are some Dolby tracks that have significant more bass to them. Particularly GoldenEye is the big one. It's got so much extra bass, and in the 5.1 discrete version, so much extra LFE in terms of the LFE track, that a lot of people thought it was a mistake. But no, that's actually the theatrical Dolby mix you get only on the Laserdisc and the first DVD releases before the 2006 Ultimate Edition, which had a remix track on it. But that has so much more bass to it that myself and some other fans lovingly refer to that as the club mix of GoldenEye. Well, there's actually a similar experience here with Mission Impossible, because only if you get the chance to see an original 1996 release print in a theater, which I have been luckily enough able to do in the past 5 years, which was amazing, by the way, and the best I've ever experienced the film, no question. Only seeing an original release print and the Laserdisc, and to a lesser extent even the VHS tape release, will give you the full low end that is in the original mix itself. So when you compare the Laserdisc, particularly in the 5.1, and you're able to compare it to the discrete versions on all the releases from the DVD onwards, you're going to notice that there's significantly less bass and less LFE and less low end, especially in the big action sequences. And because the score and the sound mix is very dynamic, that means when the bass comes in, it's an active participant in the whole mix. There's a lot of low-end bass in Danny Elfman's score to begin with. If you just listen to the soundtrack CD, which is also a nice dynamic recording that doesn't have any loudness compression applied to it. So listening to the score by itself and listening to these particularly the Laserdisc most of all, you'll notice that for some reason, I don't know why this was done, other than the fact that it must have been somebody thinking it was a mistake, like what happened with GoldenEye. The bass has sort of been tamed a bit. It's it's still there, but it's nowhere near as just. It doesn't have the oomph to it. The easiest comparison to make is the restaurant scene with Kittredge and the moment when the sound cuts out right before the gum explodes, the aquarium tank open, and when it comes back in and you get the rush of water as Tom Cruise does his first iconic crazy I'll do it myself stunt. There's a sense of the water cascading towards the listener. Well, with the original mix, with all that low end intact, that moment feels so much more huge and investing, and this goes for all of the sequences, and especially the finale in the tunnel with the helicopter and the train. So for me, that makes the Laserdisc incredibly important, and one of those discs that I swear by. And when I finally got a copy and I was able to get a demodulator and listen to the 5.1 track, I was like, oh my gosh, where has this been all my life? But if you don't have a demodulator, don't fret, because the matrixed audio track, the 2.0 track that is Matrix Surround, that has it as well, because it's actually in the source mix. And when I saw that original release print, the 5.1 had some damage, and this was common back in the day. That's why they had the backup of the optical track with the Dolby SR Matrix Surround, which is basically what you're getting on the Laserdisc Matrixed PCM track, and of course much higher quality than an optical track on a print. But when you had 5.1 AC3 dropouts theatrically, it cuts over to the Dolby SR. And I was able, in those moments, because you can tell the difference when it cuts back and forth in spots due to damage on the sprocket holes, that track still has the low end in it. And you look at the Laserdiscs, if you don't have a demodulator, or you do and you just look at you compare the 5.1 with the 2.0 matrix, that has all that low end there. And then if you throw on the VHS tape, which has the 2.0 matrix mix and a really nice sounding hi-fi track, because VHS hi-fi sounds wonderful, it's also Dolby Surround matrix encoded, so it's basically an analog version of the full PCM digital track on the Laserdisc. That has it too. So basically you can hear the theatrical sound mix with all of its low-end glory in its 2.0 matrix stereo form on the VHS and hi-fi, or the PCM track on the Laserdisc, but only the Laserdisc has the 5.1 discrete Dolby theatrical audio mix with all that beautiful low-end intact in the LFE channel. It's still one of my favorite sounding LDs, and this is still one of my favorite sound mixes of all time in terms of the design. Now, that doesn't mean the LD track is perfect. This is a 1996 film. It still has some inherent bits of noise in some of the dialogue. You can, in a few tiny spots, if you're a keen listener, you can even hear like maybe a little tiny bit of noise in some of the original mics, in terms of like very faint little bits of high-pitched noise and stuff. But that's also because they kept a lot of the room tone in the dialogue, which is something I've really always loved about the sound mix of MI. So it's obviously not going to be a modern 2023 sonic extravaganza, but it's also beautifully mixed and full of dynamics, and with this wonderful low end that they were doing in the mid-90s when all the digital sound mixing technology was like giving all the sound designers a new toy box, and all the sound systems were competing with each other to make bigger and bolder sound mixes. And this is still a beautiful film to experience theatrically. If you ever get the rare chance to see an original release print, just go. Just don't even and most theaters today can't handle how dynamic this track is. I know where I saw it, it was, it definitely showed the difference between a 1996 film and film mix and, seeing something in 2020 or 2023 where it's doesn't even compare. There is no comparison. So that's why the Laserdisc is so important. That's why this is still my preferred viewing experience, because I can't give up all that beautiful low end. So this is why I think it's one of the essential starter Laserdiscs. I think it belongs in everyone's collection. And I don't know why somebody took it upon themselves to remix the film, but unfortunately, it stayed like this. So there is no other version on video that has all the wonderful theatrical low end. And I know it's theatrical because I've actually experienced it, and I actually was able to go and look at it myself and look at both tracks. And thankfully, I know some people at the theater, so they actually let me look at the print itself and look at the date codes and everything, and geek out over, old print reels from 1996 of the first Mission Impossible, directed by Brian De Palma. And I was like, the studio doesn't want this back, do they? Can I take this home, please, please, please? They don't want it. You'll never miss it. I'll just put a. They can take the empty cans back, and I'll just put some floppy disks in it and write knock list on it. That'll work. Now, in terms of the Laserdisc itself, we have a full Laserdisc jacket rendering of the original key poster art. Very beautifully displayable, very frameable. This is the copy I've always had, so unfortunately it's got a little bit of wear right on Tom Cruise's face. So looks like he has a giant white mole or something, But anyway, still really nice, very, very simple, but nice and striking. The spine is actually red, which is a nice touch. Also makes it stick out on the shelf. The rear is the same design as the VHS tape, but uses the full jacket dimensions, and honestly, it looks a bit better because it's not all crammed in. Like most Paramount discs, this has a little bit of gloss feeling on the jacket, and the pressing is by Pioneer. But what I really love about this is the image they chose for the gatefold, which is, of course, from the Langley break-in, and beautifully tinted blue to give it that sort of techno 90s thriller look. And this was the same image they, of course, used for the soundtrack release in 1996. We do have a good number of chapters, not a whole lot, but because the film is under 2 hours, they did spread it over 3 sides to give us side 3 with the climax in full CAV format. So you can actually go through the whole train climax ending in CAV and step frame through the whole thing, which they didn't have to do because the whole film would fit on a single CLV disc. So that was a really nice touch. My only real nitpicks here is I kind of wish they would have gone ahead and done the whole film CAV, because it would have been 4 sides and they're already using 2 discs, but this isn't a special edition, so unfortunately there's no extras or anything. It's just they were nice enough to give us the end in CAV, which a lot of action films did on LD. I do wish, though, they had not gone the full route of this being, this is the big summer movie, so it's got to have a nice spiffy LD, which meant back then they did do some video processing. So you will notice it's harder to see because it's a Laserdisc, but when we go to the next release, the stuff they did is a little bit more obvious, where you can see some edge enhancement, and obviously this is a 1996 video master, if standard definition on an analog format, so it's obviously going to look very dated in 2023, but with a good setup and a good Laserdisc player, this is still a real essential Laserdisc with a nice picture transfer, top tier for the time back then, but it's most important for the theatrical audio being fully preserved with all that beautiful bass and low end. And if you have a demodulator, this is essential for that 5.1 theatrical Dolby audio, which again has never been presented on home video outside of this release. And then here for the label, it's at least a little nice to see a special custom gray label with the MI logo and things. It's not a specific film custom label like a handful of releases would get, but this still looks really nice and does help to differentiate the Laserdisc release. And then amusingly, there's still the original pack-in mail-away offer where you can get this super spiffy shirt and MI cap if you send this coupon and a check for $29.98. You will get in 6 to 8 weeks this impossible bargain and look so spiffy in your MI shirt and cap, and this dude just looks so pleased with himself. It's just, it's a beautiful photo. I wish I had these; they'd be super cool. But of course, the offer expired May 16th, 1997, unfortunately. But I don't know. Maybe if I sent this, maybe somehow it would get to a weird random PO box. But yeah, I don't know where it would go. But it's always amusing finding these and wondering if you could still get the mail-in offer. But the photo of this guy it just cracks me up because he's like, this is so rad, It's such a beautifully 90s image for a little insert. Now, I know I said that the Laserdisc, and also if you want to count the VHS having the 2.0 matrix audio as hi-fi, are the releases you get the original theatrical audio with. Well, you also have to take into account foreign editions of the pressings that I'm talking about. So, of course, being a nerd and being absolutely obsessed with this first film and adoring it so, I did pick up the Japanese Laserdisc of Mission Impossible. This is, like most Paramount discs at the time, pretty much identical to the US release, except this is the Japanese pressing, so you obviously get the obi strip, and all the writing and information is in Japanese. So here is the obi strip by itself up close, just giving you the film information. Of course, the Japanese spine. And then the rear also hyping, once again, the fact that this gets the THX seal of approval. This uses the same artwork, except being Japanese, it has the little tiny Paramount logo in the corner, like most of these did. And this is from CIC Video, who did all of the Paramount pressings for the most part, and even most of the James Bond Japanese pressings that I've gone over in other videos. It has the same artwork, but the color's a little different and the placement's a little different because they have to accommodate all of the Japanese text. And like Japanese discs always did, we nicely get all of the technical information, including digital sound, Dolby Digital AC3, all that stuff is nicely tucked in this black bar of information on the bottom. And the interior gatefold is the same, but of course, all the writing for the chapters is in Japanese. We even get the little insert about Dolby Digital and proper speaker placement and how the system works, and it's a nice handy dandy insert that doesn't survive in a lot of copies that originally came in, but not super helpful for us in the US because, of course, it's in Japanese. And then we get a standard but, pretty nice looking label with the Paramount logo, CIC Video, and then Mission Impossible, but written in Japanese. Now, the disc itself, in terms of the transfer, it is exactly the same master as the USLD, so it has the all-important theatrical audio for both the 2.0 Matrix Surround PCM and the Dolby Digital 5.1 AC3. It has the same exact side break, so it's the exact same as the US edition in those respects. A lot of Japanese discs, or pretty much any other Laserdisc pressing, usually would change the side breaks or remove that third CAV side and stuff. Especially Japanese pressings usually get rid of the CAV side. So it's interesting to note this is pretty much identical to the US pressing, except for the two things that can happen in Japanese pressings. One, this being Japanese, it obviously has hard-coded Japanese subtitles for the entire feature in the lower black letterboxing areas. So if that bugs you, you will have to live with that or try and mask it out. The other is the fact that this has the different mastering IRE level in terms of the brightness. This can happen on a lot of Japanese discs, so you will have to actually adjust your display settings, because when you pop this on, if you don't, the whole movie is going to be super dark and you're going to be wondering what's going on. It's because it's mastered for a different brightness level, the IRE level difference. So what that means essentially is if you have a Laserdisc set up and you have specific settings, what you'll have to do with your display is raise your brightness at least 5 to 10, depending on the how much the increments are in your brightness. But essentially, you have to bring up your brightness a little bit and maybe adjust your contrast level a little bit, and then that will bring it to the level it's supposed to be. And If you have both this and the US disc, you can very easily compare. And I've done that because I have both of them, because I'm a nerd for video releases. But anyway, those are the two quirks that can happen on Japanese releases, and both of them are, of course, here. The subtitles you pretty much expect because they're on all Japanese releases of American films. But this is one of the discs that does have the IRE brightness difference, so you will have to raise your brightness and probably adjust your contrast a little bit to get the proper image, because this was mastered for Japanese displays at the time, which had the difference in brightness level. And if you didn't already think I was a gigantic nerd and a huge fan of the first film, well, because the US Laserdisc is super common and very easily available for very cheap, I couldn't pass up the chance of finding a perfectly mint copy still in the shrink of the all-important US Laserdisc, so I have a second copy that doesn't have any cover damage, because this was still in the shrink wrap and this was literally $1, so I was like, I need a perfect jacket copy in my life, so I have a third copy on Laserdisc and a second copy of the US version, just because I found a $1 copy with a perfect jacket. So again, these are very affordable. They're all over the place, and you can get them for $1, and they should basically come with every player as part of the sort of entry into Laserdisc, and here's some with really important audio tracks. So that brings us to the 1998 first DVD of Mission Impossible from Paramount, and this being an early Paramount DVD, it follows suit with all of their early DVD tendencies. So this is a direct port of the current Laserdisc master, but you're now getting it in component video on a DVD. But this also being an early DVD means it's non-anamorphic, so it is, of course, picture boxed when viewed on a modern display. It is literally the Laserdisc master, but you're able to more clearly see the inherent edge enhancement and stuff that went on in older transfers of this time. And if that weren't enough, it's now got to deal with compression issues specific to the DVD for being, obviously smaller space in terms of having to take a master and cram it onto a smaller DVD at the time, and early DVDs are known for their compression issues, so you're going to see a lot of stuff pop up, and this is compounded further by the fact that they've actually put two versions of the film on the disc, as a number of early DVDs did. They included both the letterbox presentation, which is literally the Laserdisc master, but now on component video, but picture box and with a lot of yucky compression noise. But they've also put the pan and scan version on here in a separate master. So this will give you essentially what you see on the pan and scan VHS tape, but on essentially on a DVD in a digital transfer. So you've got two versions of the film competing for space on this early DVD disc, and they're basically replicating in the digital realm what you saw on the Laserdisc and the VHS tape, but this was just how the film debuted on DVD. Now, in terms of the case and the artwork, it is the same standard original poster artwork, but in a DVD keep case. Interestingly, there's no sign of the Paramount sort of widescreen or Paramount collection banner anywhere on here, because this is such an earlier disc for them. They hadn't even gotten to putting that on all their DVDs. So this is definitely the least common version to find nowadays, is the initial 1998 DVD. But you do actually get the little Paramount banner on the spine. So this is just one where it's only on the spine. If that is familiar to you, that was there, but it's nowhere on the actual cover. The rear is, of course, the same artwork as was on the VHS and Laserdisc release, but in terms of it's resized for DVD keep case dimensions. We do at least get the both the 5.1 AC3 and we get a lossy version of the Matrix stereo track. But again, neither has that all-important, wonderful theatrical bass and low end. This is the point at which it seems to have been mixed out, and so from this point onward, you no longer have that. Which is a bit strange because since this is reusing the same master as the Laserdisc did, you would think the audio would be the same, and most early DVDs were that way. They would reuse Laserdisc audio, but not all of them. And pretty quickly they started remixing audio in the DVD realm, so it's really kind of sporadic which tracks carried over from Laserdisc to DVD. But Paramount did have some that did that without messing with things. So this is just a particular case where for some reason it was decided, or they used a different version of the audio that didn't have all that wonderful low end present that was in the theatrical release. So even though this reuses the LD master, it unfortunately does not have the same identical audio. In terms of extras, you do at least get the interactive menus for the time period, and you actually get the film's trailer, which does have a little tiny flash of a deleted scene, but that was not included on the Laserdisc, which didn't have any extras. So you do get the trailer on here, and you get this little insert, but it's not as impressive, obviously, as the Laserdisc. We do get the film's logo on a plain-looking DVD that's just like all early Paramount discs, but, it looks nice enough. And the insert is okay. It's rare to find these with the insert still in them, but, it's just the generic key art and then the chapter listings, as a lot of Paramount DVDs kept for a while. This is something Paramount did a lot longer than other studios. They actually kept making these nice little chapter inserts, so it's not a booklet, but at least it's some sort of printed material, but it's nice to actually have one of these days. So I was just always curious about this initial pressing and wondering if indeed, as I had seen some discussion, that this was where the sort of remixing of the audio had taken place, and it really is. But this gives you a nice example of what early DVDs were like when they were reusing older masters and getting the ball rolling, but adding a few things and taking a few things away and changing a few things around. So this remains the initial DVD release, and this basically became what was around for a good number of years, and it's definitely the one that pops up the least now. But because it's sort of in between the different video formats and before DVDs really took off and became full-blown special editions, and the fact that it doesn't have the full theatrical audio of the Laserdisc either, and you've got two different transfers shoved down as single layer transfers and with all kinds of compression noise, this is probably the least desirable version in terms of, it's not pleasant to watch on any display, and it doesn't have the theatrical bass in the audio track either. So this is really more something you have for completion's sake, or because you're curious about the development of the film across home video. So this is just the initial DVD release, and this is how it stayed really for both the first and second films. They were pretty much in their initial DVD presentations until we hit the third film, and Paramount finally decided to spiff up the masters for them and do new releases on the upcoming new formats. So when you're going through the various video releases and you start running to the point of you get to 2000 and you get to MI2, well, we have the initial DVD, which did have custom black version of the Paramount widescreen banner, but this had a new transfer for the time, did have a VHS release, and it did get a Laserdisc release, but only in Japan. It's one of those very expensive Japanese late releases that is highly desirable and, again, very, very expensive even to this day. So this basically, I think, is probably the same overall base master as the other two editions, the VHS and the Japanese Laserdisc, but it, when viewed now, is of course very dated. However, this being 2000, it is much more of a special edition and has a rather large amount of extra features in comparison to the first film. The transfer is actually anamorphic, and it's just overall fancier, but this is still a single disc affair. But it actually does have a booklet this time, and you can just feel the extreme 2000s-ness just jumping out of this. So this became the standard version of MI2 until, again, we hit 2006 when Paramount basically revamped the video releases of the first two films to then tie in with MI3. So we already have an example of Paramount just kind of letting the first film sit around and not updating it to a better edition for quite some time, and unfortunately this became a sort of running standard with the series. So in 2006 we finally got what were labeled in Paramount terms the special collector's editions of the first two films that had slightly updated artwork. So here for the first film we now have the original poster artwork, but on this silvery background, and then with the little red Special Collector's Edition banner on the top that was custom for the reissues of MI1 and 2, and then go along with the DVD package of MI3. These were new anamorphic transfers made at this time, and they went hand in hand with the then HDDVD and early Blu-ray versions that reused these same masters. So basically, this was the last go-around for DVD for the first two films. MI3 came out on DVD, and then all three were prepped with those same masters and then quickly released on the HDDVD format. And then they were also early Blu-ray releases, because this all happened around the time of the format wars. So that does unfortunately date these masters specifically to this time period, and they were designed around DVD and HD DVD parameters. So the Blu-rays were never taking full advantage of the Blu-ray spec, and so they are pretty much tied to being 2006 projects in terms of the technical specs and the codecs used and the audio formats used, so on and so forth. So in terms of DVD, this finally gave us an anamorphic transfer. It was a bit spiffed up. Obviously, compared to the original 1998 DVD, it is significantly better. But it's still, in 2023, you're talking about a dated presentation because this is 2006. And it still has the issue of not having the full theatrical audio either. But we've also lost the original Matrix stereo track, which had a version on the 98 DVD, also, again, without the theatrical bass present. But that's been dropped entirely now, and we just have a lossy French Dolby Surround track as a backup, so it's just the remixed AC3 here. We have been given a couple new extras, a little bit about the film, mostly culled from old promo interviews done in 1996. There is a little bit about the a little featurette recorded at the International Spy Museum for real, actual spy information, although it's really more of a basic piece that just encourages you to visit the museum sometime, not really anything to do with the film. And then everything else is just fluff pieces, and then we have not one but two tribute montages for when Tom Cruise was winning some awards, basically clips of his other films. So it's like, okay, why is that here? So unfortunately, there's not really, there's at least a little bit in the extras about the film, but there's nothing that's satisfying. There's nothing really about the production or all the production hassles. There's never been an audio commentary, which would be amazing if they could get Brian De Palma to sit down and talk about this film. And of course, he would probably be extremely candid, and it would be absolutely a wonderful listen, but that's never happened. We do thankfully get the trailer, and we also get the TV spots, which all of these do, and some of them have that same little flash of the deleted love scene from the film, so they are important for that. And then we also get a very, very small photo gallery, so at least there's some extras, and they can claim there's an extras supplemental feature section, but it's outside of a tiny bit of De Palma talking in 1996 buried in some of these, it's just the trailer and TV spots. That's everything else is just a throwaway. And if that were not Paramount just keeping things simple enough, we open the case to find no insert and the usual generic silver gray plain Paramount disc label. So unfortunately, that meant that this is just a standard generic Paramount DVD, really. And the only benefit is getting the original TV spots and actually getting an anamorphic transfer. But you still have the problem with not having the full theatrical audio, and it's just a slight upgrade in terms of you don't have the problems of it being an early DVD and it's now anamorphic, but it's not much to write home about otherwise. At this same time, MI2 got a similar makeover with the same cover artwork, just updated to have the Special Collector's Edition banner across the top, and it's now a 2-disc set, so the compression's a little bit better, and they moved most of the extras over to a second disc, but otherwise, it is just, again, a slight transfer upgrade to the original disc, in terms of the first DVD release, and it was still a dated master. And these were all done because they were prepping the HD DVDs and the initial Blu-rays. And then MI3 came out at the same time. They did these reissues of the first two films to tie in with MI3. So all three films then came out on the new formats at the same time. Now, when you talk about those, they are using the same masters, but they're in HD, so they are better in terms of picture quality, and they do have different audio codecs being used. But this is where you run into the Paramount issue of, again, not really treating these films with a whole lot of respect or putting a lot of effort in, because the HD DVDs are obviously an improvement because they're in HD, but they do contain the 5.1 mixes for all three films, the first three of the series, in what was then typical for that format, the Dolby Digital Plus codec. And this is essentially a lossless codec that's, I think it's like 1506 kilobits per second. It's somewhere around that for the actual bit rate of the track on the HD DVD of the first three. And while this is not the full high-resolution lossless track we're accustomed to on Blu-ray and beyond today, it was still an improvement over what was on most DVDs, and it's roughly equivalent to the full bit rate of DTS on early DVDs and DTS Laserdiscs. So it was a significant improvement in terms of the audio codec. However, the Blu-rays, because they were early discs and they were designed around the same parameters, they have a very limited video bit rate. So it's basically a similar, if not actually technically worse, encoding than the HD DVDs. But for some reason, they stuck with a really more of a lossy audio presentation, because the Blu-rays include the 5.1 mixes in Dolby Digital only, and I think they're actually at the 640 kilobit per second Dolby Digital form that is common to early Blu-rays, but it's still not full lossless quality, and it's not even the same quality level as what was on the HD DVDs, which also, ironically, even though the format is not technically as good as a Blu-ray disc, had slightly better encoding. So the HD DVDs of the first three films actually had slightly better picture and significantly better sound than the Blu-rays did, because none of that makes any sense. And other than Paramount really dropped the ball, and they did this quite frequently with this series, and in some aspects actually continue to do so. So this is how the series entered the HD realm, and then from this point onward, when the format war ended and HD DVD died out, and we were completely on board with Blu-ray, you would think that we would see an upgrade at some point. Not really. So to talk about the standard Blu-ray release of the first film, we are again talking about this same, I guess technically the same 2006 master, which probably means it was made in 2005. So it is HD, but the bitrate is quite low because this is a very early Blu-ray, and you only have the remixed 5.1 audio without the theatrical bass in it at a lossy Dolby Digital codec. So there is no upgrade to DTS-HDMA master audio. There is no Dolby Digital TrueHD. It is simply a lossy Dolby Digital track, and it ports over, like the HD DVD did, the same very skimpy, if not mostly pointless, fluff piece extras that were part of the 2006 DVD. So basically, you just have a very early Blu-ray slight upgrade of the DVD, and really the only upgrade was the fact that the audio codec was a tiny bit bigger, and it's now technically in HD, but it is still very underwhelming, and it's already a 2007 Blu-ray made from a 2006, if not 2005 source, so it's already dated. And while yes, technically it's okay and it's serviceable, it was much better at the time when most people were still watching, just getting into Blu-ray or only having a 720p television, and it covered up a lot of the flaws. But when viewed now, it really doesn't help the film look as good as it really does, and it is hideously outdated. So it really deserved, along with 2 and 3, I mean, all 3 films deserved a proper spiffing up, or at the very least, a better encoding with lossless audio. Well, that didn't happen here in the US. And unfortunately, they just kept repackaging and reissuing these same discs over and over and over again, and with various artwork or in various box set packages or multi-film packages. And every time we all got our hopes up they would actually remaster these, and they never did. It would just be the same disc copied over and over. And unfortunately, this even kept going when the 4th film, Ghost Protocol, came out, which sort of reinvigorated the franchise, and really, I mean, it's in all aspects, it's really more of a soft reboot of the franchise and gave it a shot in the arm it needed, because there had been a gap since 2006, and Paramount had kind of just gone through the motions and just done these represses of the same 3 Blu-rays that were really crappy over and over. But interestingly, there was something that happened in other countries. And so that's when you have to look at the Scandinavian and other territory Blu-rays of the first 3 films, which were seemingly done to tie into Ghost Protocol, because they all came out pretty much in box sets with the 4th film. But also, in addition to having new artwork that was updated to match, and obviously looking like a refresh of the films on disc, they did feature different encodes, and they have lossless audio. So to talk about that, I have the Scandinavian Blu-ray of Mission Impossible, which has the new updated artwork, taking original imagery and sort of bringing it into a new stylized design made to match with the other films. Has a new spine and a new rear, and obviously this being the Scandinavian release, it has other languages and is talking about all the different foreign language options, which is probably the reason why these were re-encoded. This is quite frequent in a lot of foreign releases. You'll see slightly different encodes to accommodate all the foreign language dubs, but sometimes they actually do newer transfers or newer encodes with lossless audio, because they're, actually making a good disc with what they have, and if they're already going to have to re-encode it anyway for the other language tracks, then somebody somewhere decided, hey, let's actually put lossless audio on here. So this does have the 5.1. Unfortunately, it does not have the theatrical base intact, but it is in lossless quality in the DTS-HDMA codec. So that's why this was such a really important disc to import, because not only did you get the massive upgrade in finally having HDMA lossless audio, but you also got a better encode, which did mean at least some slight uptick in picture quality. Unfortunately, it's still the same crappy old master, but any increase in picture quality was worthwhile, especially if you were a big fan of the films and you're a videophile and you read about the HD DVDs being better, and you did actually consider purchasing a dead media format just to check out a few small examples that were supposed to be better than the crappy Blu-rays. And I did consider that at one point because I have problems, but thankfully I was finally able to find this. Unfortunately, these went in and out of print, and when I found out about them, they were pretty much gone in terms of trying to import them, and I had to search eBay and other places for actually a couple years to find them. So I was able to get this as part of the whole box set, which is this, which has, of course, Ghost Protocol all over it. And if it wasn't confusing enough, other countries used the same artwork. Like in the UK, they had the same artwork, another 4-film box, but that simply reused the same crappy US disc for 1 through 3. So it's not a part and parcel thing 100% across the board that all European editions were these new encodes with lossless audio. No, 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 no. This is Paramount. That would be too easy. So you had to actually go in and figure out what country it was that had the newer discs with the better picture and sound. And then if you were looking at the box set, you had to actually make sure it was the Scandinavian version. And if that were not confusing enough, here in the US, Paramount updated the cover art again for tying in with Ghost Protocol and used this new artwork on the newest reprintings of the same crappy US disc. So you had to specify and make sure and look at the actual catalog numbers. And then the biggest giveaway is if you look at the rear and you see all the flags on it, and that starts to clue you in that you've got the right thing. And of course, the disc labels have all the additional rating codes on them, which also further helps. But again, the only way you knew for sure is to actually look at the catalog numbers. And if all else fails, just actually pop the disc in and look at the menu or start playing the movie and, check the audio codec and then compare it against the US disc. And you'll notice the bitrate was significantly higher on the Scandinavian release. Of course, MI2 has the new artwork, but this being the Scandinavian release, it does have a better encode and it actually has lossless audio. So that was a giant improvement. But to make it slightly more confusing, we do have the original disc labels, what they used, but it does have all the rating logos. So again, you can figure this out if you're looking at a bunch of these, but you got to really scrutinize. So trying to find these on eBay with a lot of generic images, or you're having to squint and look at rating logos on the back of cases on a bunch of eBay listings for a couple years, that was a bit frustrating. And then here is MI3. Again, rating logos on the front and the rear with all of the foreign information. And of course, the dead giveaway is the fact that it's listed as 5.1 DTS-HDMA master audio in English, so obviously what you don't get on the US release. And then this actually reuses the same label, even saying it's disc 1 of a multi-feature set, because of course MI3 did have 2 discs on the original releases, and then there was an exclusive bonus DVD disc of extras that have never been ported. So technically, if you want every MI3 extra, you have to have the original exclusive bonus disc from the first release, because none of this is easy to understand. And then Ghost Protocol here is the Scandinavian version. Same art as the US, but foreign logos in terms of the rating logos. So you can tell this is the Scandinavian version from all the writing as well. Just a standard label, or I should say lack of a label. And then they all fit in this very simple set. It's got a nice gloss finish on it, but it's also very thin, so it's a little flimsy. And as you can see, even when I got this, it had some dings and wear, so just that's to be expected. But, it looks nice enough. I wish these did have, like all the modern versions, unfortunately don't. I wish it did have all the exclusive extras that are on specific pressings, or I should say specific editions of MI3 and Ghost Protocol. But again, you can track those down. You just have to find the specific store editions. Like I have the specific, I think this was for Best Buy. This is the specific extras edition of Ghost Protocol. Slightly different artwork, slightly different rear cover, but of course it's the main feature disc, but has an entire second Blu-ray of quite a number of special features, which have not been ported over, so you have to have this specific Blu-ray edition just to have those extras. But if that weren't convoluted enough, if you just wanted this for the film as well, it's technically not as well encoded as the standard Blu-ray, so you just really want this for the extras. So that brings us up to Ghost Protocol. Well, what happened when the 5th film in the series, Rogue Nation, came out? Well, we saw yet another series of repackagings and reissues, and even another box set now of the 5-film series. So you would think that since we had the wonderful Scandinavian editions that did have better encodes with slightly better picture and actually had lossless audio, that by now we would finally see these get used in these new box sets and new repackagings to tie in with Rogue Nation. No. No. That would be too easy. Again. So once again, we saw the same crappy 2007 Blu-rays repackaged and repressed and copied yet again and shoved into the newest box sets of all 5 films, including Rogue Nation. So that still made it essential to track down the Scandinavian editions, which were by this time out of print and getting hard to find. And this was when I was really trying to find those. Primarily because I love the first film so much, and any improvement over that crappy US Blu-ray was something I was really hoping to find. So that's why I really tried to find that set, because if I was going to get the first one, I wanted to get 2 and 3 as well. And just a quick note about Rogue Nation: if you thought Ghost Protocol was the only film that had a specific package of extras of substantial material tied to a particular edition, you would be wrong, because Rogue Nation had one. I think this was the Target Special Edition, which came with this limited slip box, and it's credited as a book, but it's really more of a printed photo gallery. But this actually does have additional extras that are not in a particular later release. So while you do get the sort of nicer swag, and for some reason the way this is printed, it always makes that crackly noise every time you try to open it. I think because it's this really flimsy but very thick high gloss paper, or actual stock they used in terms of printing this. Again, as you can see, it's literally just photos. This actually has an entire disc of supplemental features on the Blu-ray. So this is a 2 Blu-ray plus a standard DVD set. So the extras that are contained on the second Blu-ray are once again only exclusive to this particular Blu-ray release, because for some reason we can't even get all the extras ported over in when we have continual box sets when new films come out, and it starts to pile up. So there are exclusive extras for 3 that have never been ported. There are exclusive extras for 4 and 5 that have never been ported over. So that's why I have multiple copies of even some of the later films. So that brings us to the release of the films on 4K UHD to tie in with the release of the 6th film, Mission Impossible Fallout. And this was phenomenal news because it meant we could finally dump and get rid of those awful Blu-rays of the first 3 films that have been recycled ad nauseum. Ironically, we were able to do that, but they did rear their ugly head up once again, because if you go for one of the sets, particularly this one, which is, especially when it's on sale, a fantastic bargain, of all 6 films, plus all 6 films on Blu-ray, so it's a dual format Blu-ray and UHD set, all in a nice, rather compact box set. It's nicely done. This is definitely the way to go for getting the series, and it's such a bargain that it's really a better value than buying 1 or 2 films by themselves. It's nicely done, nicely printed. I would say this is actually the most impressive Paramount UHD box set they've ever done. It's still simple, but it gets the job done, and it actually has real cases for the films, and they're split by the format. The bigger one is the Blu-ray, or I should say the case containing the Blu-rays of all 6 films. Have the credits on the back. And they've now switched to just having generic blue Paramount labels. So each film gets a single disc, except Fallout gets 2 discs because you do have additional special features. So that means, as I said before, the little bit of extras for 3, I think it's over 2 hours of extras for Ghost Protocol, and the whole second disc of Rogue Nation extras are not here. So that's why I've had to hang on to those other editions, because technically there should at least be a second disc for Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation, but there's not. So you've already missed all those extras, plus the handful of extras for 3 that aren't here. But, at least we do get, all the films included on Blu-ray, which is a nice touch, and it doesn't really happen much to get a full dual format release anymore, especially for 6 films. But once again, you would think that we would get the better encoded lossless audio discs from the Scandinavian editions. But no, once again, even if you got rid of them, they've come back. These are the same crappy US 2007 Blu-rays of Mission Impossible 1 through 3. So even if you got rid of them, you bought them again. And if you didn't believe me, all you have to do is look on the back, and right there you see English Dolby Digital 5.1, which really sticks out when you get to Ghost Protocol and beyond, and you see the lossless 7.1 tracks or Dolby Atmos for Fallout. That's these don't exactly match Paramount, but Paramount's going to Paramount. But of course, your real focus is on the 4K UHD presentations. So those are nicely included in a separate case with the black 4K casing and logo and everything, which is nice. It's a lot thinner because each film is a single disc and has a standard black bluish Paramount label. So unfortunately, no unique identifiers. And each film is only a single disc. So once again, you don't have all of the extras that have been on previous editions, but they are finally all brand new transfers for the first 3 films. And then again, you're now bringing Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation into 4K UHD, and of course, all done to time up with Fallout, which was then the new film. So coming out on 4K UHD is the same time as the Blu-ray. So really the focus for all the newness is primarily on the first 3 films, because they're finally getting away for people who hadn't imported the Scandinavian discs from those awful old 2007 Blu-rays, which were based on the 2006 and 2005 releases. So this is finally giving them lossless audio. But it seems like, because they're Dolby TrueHD 5.1, it seems pretty much like what's on the Scandinavian disc, but those are actually DTS-HDMA and have slightly bigger codecs than the TrueHD tracks here, so that's another bit of weirdness. But for the first film, and my big focus is the first film, unfortunately, once again, even on the UHD, it doesn't have the theatrical low-end present. So that means that every single release from 1998 onwards has had that mixed out for some reason. It's not there. So I do think the lossless tracks here on the UHD and the Scandinavian Blu-ray are much better than what was on the 2007 Blu-ray, the HDDVD, I would guess as well, because I've never actually been able to view that, and the DVDs. Still, you don't have the same oomph, you don't have the same power and impact as the Laserdisc AC3 does, which is the theatrical audio. So I would have thought that for this, they would have finally just actually given us the theatrical track without the remixing, but unfortunately, once again, that has carried over. So while I do think the UHD transfer is obviously head and shoulders above the horrible old 2007 US Blu-ray that's been ported and is even included in this set instead of a remastered Blu-ray, it still doesn't have audio that's as good as the Laserdisc, because the Laserdisc does have the full theatrical base present, even though it's not lossless. So that's why when I rewatch the film, I pretty much always rewatch the Laserdisc, because I love the audio mix of this film so much that I can't bear to not have that low end present, and I'm so accustomed to it that I really miss it when it's not there. These, of course, all have brand new HDR grades, and they are phenomenal, substantial improvements. That's an understatement over the old 2007 disc. But specifically focusing on the first film, my issue is primarily the fact that, once again, even though it's a lossless track finally for US viewers, it's not the full theatrical audio experience because it doesn't have the theatrical LFE and low-end bass present. So unfortunately, I can't say that I'm a fan of the audio presentation. But at least we finally did get the film with a new transfer in 4K on this UHD with an HDR grade. That didn't mean we got any new extras, because it's still the same crappy old little fluff pieces that date back to the 2006 DVD. So that was a real missed opportunity. Again, a commentary alone would have been really nice to see, but at least we finally did get a 4K presentation of the film, finally, and a new scan. So that is finally doing something right. One last note about this package: it does have a little booklet, but it's very much on the simplistic and generic side. Really, generic is the best word, but basically a little bit about some of the key cast members, and that's about it. So it's just basically some little photos in a tiny booklet. There is one other release to talk about, because in spite of not including remastered Blu-rays of the first 3 films in the new UHD collection and dual format release, they did actually make a remastered 25th anniversary Blu-ray of the first film with a special package release and a little slipcover and everything. But they didn't put it in the box set, so you have to purchase this separately, which I have not done yet. And to be honest, I think I might, just for completion's sake, but also because I am curious to look at that transfer specifically, even though it's just going to be an SDR conversion of the HDR presentation of this 4K master. But it does contain the same lossless 5.1 track as is on the UHD. So I know, once again, it's not going to have the full theatrical audio present with the full theatrical bass. It'll just be a way to actually get the new 4K master in 1080p SDR, and it should have been included along with remastered Blu-rays from the 4K masters of the first 3 films alone. Should have had that, and they should have gone ahead and done a new Blu-ray of the 4K master for Ghost Protocol as well. And to be honest, really even include Rogue Nation as well. They should have been, if they were going to make a remastered Blu-ray of the 4K master of the first film and sell it as a standalone, and they were going to put out this box set and include all 6 films on Blu-ray as well, it would make sense to just go ahead and do remastered discs for all of them, put them in the set, and then you can sell them individually and repackage them in different box sets how many other times you want to. Because, once again, Paramount did do a number of repackagings, reissues, box sets, and then, of course, put these versions on streaming services. And now, with the release of Dead Reckoning Part 1, they've done another revamping and even a series of steelbooks. But, once again, they have just reused the same crappy Blu-rays once more. So I don't think there's any remastered Blu-ray of these 4K masters for 2 and 3, let alone 4 and 5. So it's just that, I think it's just that standalone 25th anniversary version of the first film that did get a new Blu-ray of the 4K master. And so that's the only version besides the HDDVD, I've not physically owned. And at first, since I bought the UHD set, I didn't think I needed that, but since preparing for this video and deciding to go over all the editions, I decided that's probably the last version of Mission Impossible that I will have to pick up to then be able to look at that in particular. And it'll be interesting to see how that compares to the HDR presentation on the UHD. Sometimes for catalog films, it's very interesting to compare the SDR 1080p version of the new 4K master to the UHD with HDR. So ultimately, what all this means is, if you want the best picture quality of the original Mission Impossible film from 1996, you need to pick up the UHD or the newer 25th anniversary Blu-ray made from the 4K master, which came out back in 2021. No version of the film has a really impressive amount of extras, and the only extras there are the very skimpy and unimpressive ones that date back to the 2006 DVD. So really the only extras of note are the trailer and the TV spots. So that's really all you're getting of importance. Unfortunately, though, I can't say that there's the audio is as good as I wish it was, because none of these releases after the Laserdisc release has the full theatrical low end present, and so only the Laserdisc in both the 2.0 Matrix stereo track with Dolby Surround encoding and the 5.1 AC3 discrete Dolby Digital track, and including the hi-fi stereo Matrix Dolby Surround of the VHS tape, have the theatrical low end present. So if you love this film and you're a home theater enthusiast, you really do need to have a copy of the Laserdisc, and it's so inexpensive that everybody can afford $1 or $2 for the copy of the super common Mission Impossible Laserdisc. And whether you have a demodulator or not, you can still enjoy the theatrical audio in the 2.0 Dolby Surround version and notice the difference in the low end that is just simply not there on any version after this point. So it's really one of those examples where it's actually a good thing to have older copies, and particularly it's good to have a working Laserdisc player still around, because there are quite a number of films that still sound best only on their Laserdisc editions. And I don't know why this has occurred, other than perhaps someone thought it was a mistake to have the LFE a bit louder in places overall, or it was just deemed not something that people wanted to carry over into home theater of the DVD age. And then as films move into streaming and they start worrying about how films sound on all kinds of devices, even including sound bars and smartphones especially, then they start remixing audio further and applying EQ and doing all kinds of things across successive releases that can further water down or dilute the audio experience of a film. But this is an example where after a certain point, for some reason, it was changed or tweaked, and it did remove quite a bit of the experience that I really treasure about this audio mix. So that's why I've delved more deeply into the video releases of this film than I would normally, even with films I'm a great fan of, unless there's some technical reason to really dig into the various releases. I usually don't try to look at every version I can get my hands on, but I've always loved the mix of this film, and I really loved the first film, so that's why I thought it was important to do this video history. And this is also something I've been doing for a number of years. This isn't something I was able to put together overnight. This has taken me a good number of years on and off to track down editions, especially finding the Scandinavian Blu-rays of the first three in this box set, and comparing audio tracks and hoping there would be a better version that popped up someday. So we do finally have the 4K master on the UHD with an HDR grade, so you can finally see a much better version of the film in terms of the picture quality. But unfortunately, the audio still isn't quite there yet because it's not the full theatrical audio track, essentially. So that is my overview of the video history of the original 1996 first film in the Mission Impossible series, plus some rough overview of the other films in the series leading up to the UHD collection, including Mission Impossible Fallout. And as you can see, I have accumulated quite a number of Mission Impossible copies on home video because I can't fit all of them without moving my head to show you the whole shelf. And then, of course, I have 2 additional copies of the first film on Laserdisc, including the Japanese version, because I have problems. So I hope my babblings about films, physical media releases, home video histories, and the Mission Impossible series have been at least somewhat fun and informative. Personally, I hope somebody at Paramount changes their mind and at some point allows a release of maybe the 4K master of the first film to come out without its theatrical base chopped out. But, you know, unfortunately, given the sort of lackluster sense of interest that Paramount has had in making fancier releases of any of the films in the series, or complete or comprehensive releases in the past, even including the UHD set, because it doesn't port over all the old extras, or have remastered Blu-rays for the earlier films, I don't see that happening, unfortunately. So I do encourage diehard fans of the first film, if you have a Laserdisc player and you don't have a copy of the first film on Laserdisc, then just go buy the first copy you find, because they're everywhere and they'll only cost you $1 or $2, and the audio really is worth it. And also, it's the first MI film and has nice art and nice gatefold. But otherwise, the 4K UHD is obviously the best in terms of picture quality. So until there is maybe some new interest, if they do, they're obviously going to do a newer box set when Dead Reckoning Part 2 comes out, maybe they'll decide to go back to the well and make a few new extras or put something into doing newer discs of the earlier films, and hopefully that might mean a release of the first film on 4K UHD with some actual new informative extras, and maybe, fingers crossed, just maybe, the disc that makes you say red light, green light. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.